Kaliningrad has always been one of the strangest pieces on Europe's geopolitical chessboard. It's a heavily militarized Russian exclave, trapped between NATO members Poland and Lithuania. Cut off from mainland Russia by hundreds of kilometers, and surrounded by some of the most hostile territory Moscow could imagine. For decades, Russia treated Kaliningrad as an untouchable fortress, a forward base that threatened NATO's eastern flank and symbolized Moscow's reach deep into Europe. But today, that assumption is cracking fast. For the first time since the Cold War, Russia is facing a very real possibility of losing Kaliningrad altogether. If that happens, the region may never again be what Moscow wants it to be. Instead, Europe could see the rebirth of Königsberg in everything but name. To understand why Kaliningrad is now at risk, you first need to understand how unnatural its existence truly is. Kaliningrad was never historically Russian. For centuries, it was Königsberg, the capital of East Prussia, a city deeply German in its culture, architecture, and identity. It was only after World War II, when the Soviet Union carved up Eastern Europe, that Königsberg was seized, its German population expelled, and the city renamed after Mikhail Kalinin. What followed was an organic development, but forced militarization. The region became a closed Soviet military zone, packed with troops, missiles, radar stations, and naval assets, all designed to threaten NATO and control the Baltic Sea. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, you might think Kaliningrad would have become a liability. Instead, Russia doubled down. Moscow turned it into a missile fortress, deploying advanced S-Condor ballistic missiles, air defense systems, electronic warfare units, and a powerful Baltic fleet presence. On paper, Kaliningrad became what strategists call an A2AD, Boblin Anti-Axis, area denial zone meant to keep NATO forces at bay and intimidate Europe. But that very strategy planted the seeds of its own vulnerability. Kaliningrad's greatest weakness is its geography. It is completely isolated. In peacetime, Russia relies on rail links through Lithuania and Poland and sea routes across the Baltic to keep the exclave supplied. But in a wartime or a serious crisis, those lifelines could be cut in hours. NATO doesn't even need to invade Kaliningrad to neutralize it. It only needs to seal it off. And that is exactly what recent military planning and exercises have been focusing on. For years, analysts worried about the Suwalki Gap, a narrow strip of land between Poland and Lithuania, calling it NATO's most vulnerable point. The fear was that Russia might try to seize this corridor to connect Kaliningrad with its ally Belarus. But now, the strategic logic has completely flipped. Today, it's Russia that fears losing access through the Suwalki Gap. If NATO closes it, Kaliningrad becomes a trapped garrison, isolated, undersupplied, and slowly suffocating. Russia's war in Ukraine has made this problem exponentially worse. Moscow has poured men, equipment, ammunition, and political capital into a grinding conflict that has drained its military strength. Units that were once stationed in Kaliningrad have reportedly been redeployed to Ukraine. Modern equipment has been lost at an alarming rate, and sanctions have strangled Russia's ability to replace its advanced systems. The image of Kaliningrad as an invincible fortress no longer matches the reality on the ground. Meanwhile, NATO has grown stronger and more unified than ever. The alignment of Finland and Sweden with the alliance fundamentally changes the balance of power in the Baltic. The Baltic Sea is no longer a contested space. It is rapidly becoming a NATO-controlled lake. Russian ships leaving Kaliningrad can be tracked from the moment they leave port. Russian aircraft face constant surveillance from all sides. In a crisis, NATO, naval, and air power could impose a de facto blockade without firing a single shot. Politically, Kaliningrad is also becoming a major headache for Moscow. The region's economy is fragile, heavily dependent on subsidies from the mainland and trade with the EU. Sanctions have hit it harder than the rest of Russia, precisely because it relies on imports and transit through what are now hostile states. Living standards have fallen. Isolation has grown. The population, while not openly rebellious, is increasingly aware that their future is tied more closely to Europe than to a distant Moscow that can even guarantee their security. This is where the idea of Königsberg re-emerge, not necessarily as a German city, but as a European one. If Russia were ever forced to relinquish control over Kaliningrad, whether through military defeat, political collapse, or a negotiated settlement, the region wouldn't exist in a vacuum. Poland, Lithuania, the European Union, and NATO would immediately step in to shape its future. Demilitarization would be inevitable. The missile bases, naval assets, and military infrastructure that define Kaliningrad today would be dismantled or neutralized. For Europe, this would be a strategic revolution. The removal of Kaliningrad as a Russian military outpost would eliminate one of the biggest threats to the Baltic states and Poland. The Suwalki Gap would no longer be a dangerous flashpoint. NATO's eastern flank would become more secure overnight. The Baltic Sea would be fully under European and NATO control, ending Russia's ability to project power into Northern Europe once and for all. From Russia's perspective, losing Kaliningrad would be more than just a military setback, would be a psychological and symbolic disaster. It would mark the final collapse of the post-World War II territorial order that Moscow inherited from the Soviet Union. It would signal that Russia can no longer hold on to distant, hostile territories through force alone, and it would raise very uncomfortable questions about other regions currently under Moscow's control. Crucially, Russia knows all of this. That's why it reacts so aggressively whenever Kaliningrad is mentioned. The threats, the nuclear rhetoric, the constant propagandites, all part of an effort to project strength where real strength is eroded. But deterrence only works if it's credible, and credibility depends on capability. As Russia's conventional military power bleeds out in Ukraine, its ability to defend an isolated exclave hundreds of kilometers from home becomes increasingly questionable. There's also the internal Russian dilemma. Defending Kaliningrad in a major conflict would require enormous resources. Russia no longer has an abundance. Reinforcing the region would mean diverting forces from other critical fronts. Supplying it would mean running a gauntlet of NATO surveillance and potential interdiction. Every single move Moscow makes to secure Kaliningrad actually highlights just how insecure it truly is. Europe, on the other hand, doesn't need to rush. Time is on NATO's side. Economic pressure, military modernization, and political unity are slowly tightening the noose. Kaliningrad doesn't have to fall dramatically in a storm of missiles and tanks. It can simply become irrelevant, neutralized, and eventually transformed by the new realities on the ground. If that transformation ever happens, the name Königsberg will carry immense symbolic weight. It will represent not just a return to history, but the end of an era where borders were redrawn by force and held by fear. It will represent Europe closing one of the last open wounds of the 20th century. And it will stand as a warning to any power that believes geography and coercion can outweigh economics, alliances, and legitimacy. Russia is not about to lose Kaliningrad in the sense of an imminent invasion tomorrow, but it is losing the conditions that made holding Kaliningrad possible in the first place. Isolation, military overstretch, economic decay, and strategic encirclement are doing the work that armies once did. Step by step, the fortress is turning into a liability. And when liabilities become unbearable, even the most stubborn powers are forced to let go. Kaliningrad's future is no longer fully in Moscow's hands. It is being shaped by Europe, by NATO, and by Russia's own decisions elsewhere. Whether it formally becomes Königsberg again, or simply a demilitarized European region under a new name, one thing is clear. The era of Kaliningrad as Russia's Baltic dagger is coming to an end. And when that dagger finally falls from Moscow's grip, the strategic map of Europe will change forever. Thanks for watching. If you found this analysis interesting, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into geopolitics and history. We'll see you in the next one.